Thank you for joining us for our panel. We're going to go ahead and do quick intros down the line, starting by this lovely lady.
Hi everyone. I thought this was going to be masked on, and so I didn't do the makeup on the bottom of my face. So that's an adjustment for me right now. So my name's Ishita. I go by Ishita Mili. I'm a Bengali American female choreographer, artistic director of Dance, my own dance company that is inspired by my roots in Indian classical dance, Bharatanatyam, Ayurvedic chow, and hip hop and contemporary styles. But it's ultimately a bit of global storytelling. Also, my pronouns are she and her.
I'm Jess. I'm originally from Australia. I've been here for 7 years. I'm a first-generation Vietnamese Chinese woman. I'm also the founder of Scallion, Pancake, which is a purpose-driven brand marketing agency. And on the side, I do a bunch of random shit like I source vintage, I take photos, I model, I train my dog really well, so if anyone needs a dog trainer, I'm very good at that.
And I'm Treya Lam. I'm a transnational Taiwanese American faculty, non-binary, my pronouns are they them. Also a multi-instrumentalist, composer, performer, and I work with a lot of artists across the different disciplines, including dance, film, and installations.
Awesome. Well, we definitely have a lot of different, I would say different categories or boxes represented here today. And so that leads right into what we're talking about, which is intersectionality, as well as breaking the model minority myth and talking about the monoliths that are really placed upon us. So I think one of the things that happens to us, and we get conditioned into this kind of weird world, is when we're growing up in school, you know, we have to take those like standardized tests, and there's always like a box like, check, are you African American? Are you white? Like, where are you from? And everybody, I feel like most people in this room just check Asian, whether or not we're Pacific Islander or we're Tongan or Polynesian. There's just this one box, and we kind of define ourselves through that same lens. For most of our adult lives, I think a lot of us are just kind of coming into this place where we don't have to necessarily be in a category or in a box anymore. So I would love to hear your thoughts, everyone, on intersectionality and why it really matters today.
Sure, I mean, I'll go ahead. I think that being, breaking from, let's say, this Asian subcategory that I think that we've all been in for a long time. I think what I'm feeling now in the present is just how different Asian means to so many people, even within the categories. I think we've done a good job of now, okay, South Asian is its own category now within that, even though that's still not its own box. But even within, let's say, South Asian, that's still a term that I think brown people as a whole have recently started using. Otherwise, when you used to say brown, usually you assume Indian, which is really not so accurate. And those ideas of identity and breaking down the Asian multifaceted identities is something that has been really more recent for me in discovering and trying to navigate and figure out. I mean, I could talk forever about how even just within the South Asian identity, and then let's say just taking Indian versus Bangladeshi and Pakistani and all the other different types of brown there are. Just within India, there's like 22 different languages, minimum, each with its own alphabet, right? Like you're in Europe, right? And I'm in Spain, and I can go to France, and I don't know what it means, but I can still read signs, right? But in India, I can go in my state in India, and I can drive an hour south. I can't understand a single thing, right? That's just the multiplicity of just the Indian identity, which is a subcategory of the South Asian identity, which is the subcategory of the entire Asian, category. That's just, I mean, it's huge. I think those are things that I'm passionate about breaking down more in the future, but that's kind of where I am.
I use the term, I think that the general public has been deviating away from the original meaning of intersectionality. I think it was like academic research written by a Black woman whose name I cannot remember. And so I'm just acknowledging and being transparent that like I'm not as knowledgeable in like that true meaning of intersectionality. So I can talk about like holding multiple identities because I think that feels more true to what I know. And for me, growing up, I really rejected labels and identity, and it wasn't really until like the last couple of years where I was processing the grief of losing a parent and being really intentional about my healing. And part of that healing came from like, who am I? And so that's just been something I've been exploring over the last couple of years, and like finding a wholeness from the multiple identities that I hold in one being.
I mean, I guess when I think about, am I amplified right now? When I think about intersectionality, I think a lot about, I think recently we're all at some point now on like journeys with self-inquiry around our racial identity, and I think I'm at a point in that journey where I'm now thinking about how the struggle that my family and my people have faced is really intimately connected with all the other struggles that are happening around the world, and I think until we can really form a coalition around being able to connect the dots between how all of this is like in relation to white supremacy and his class struggle, that's like what I'm super interested in. And I think that it's been really hard to understand how to move forward with that in an increasingly polarized online world where you don't necessarily like need to know what you're talking about to speak the loudest. I think it drives a lot of like division and polarization. So what I'm just like thinking about generally these days is like how can we move forward if we're all fighting different battles and we don't think that we are in the foundation of it connected by our causes. And I think that's a bit concerning, honestly, because like how else do you inspire mass change without like coming together?
I think that is such a brilliant and beautiful way to put it, because I think there is almost this feeling of like, I don't want to say anything if I'm not going to get it just right. And I get things wrong all the time, like all the time. And I think that's okay as long as we're putting forth that effort, trying to be a little bit better every day. Having these conversations, I feel like I never had any of these conversations growing up. That's not something we discussed in the home. I think in a lot of Asian households, there's this idea of almost swallowing the bitterness of like, you know, other people have it worse, or like we're just going to keep our heads down and get good grades and do all those things because it's what that American dream really is. So when I think of Asianness being a monolith, what's interesting is that Asians are the fastest growing racial group in the country, in all of the United States, but within that, there are 20 plus different cultures that claim that ancestry. So when I think of, you know, we go back to those ideas of categories, we put ourselves in these categories like, I am Asian, I am a female, I am a sister, I am a girlfriend, and I don't think we necessarily need those anymore, because all these things are fluid and they're changing. And I think it's a beautiful thing that they are changing, because I think it's about time. It's time to step forward and do those other things and challenge what we believe to be true.
I mean, I think it's interesting that we spend our whole lives trying to like categorize ourselves into specific boxes, and I think that lately with the modeling that I've done, it's been really interesting to commoditize different parts of myself. Like, I get booked for jobs because I have psoriasis, which is a skin condition. So it's like kind of weird to use money when it's like literally a health condition. And then I'm sure I get booked because I'm Asian. So I think like being hyper aware of all these boxes that you are labeled by and how people can easily digest you is very confining. Like, it's a parameter that I think is put upon us. But we were talking previously, and I think something that Treya said that really resonated with me was also just the importance of labels and the importance of being able to name and acknowledge who you are in order to actually accept and then move forward from it. So I don't think we're quite like beyond labels just yet, and I love that we're living in a world where there are more words than before to describe who you are, who you want to be. But I do think that this like need, I think that is driven by capitalism to be like, this is who I am, and this is how easily defined I can be, then rejects the nuance that exists in all of us.
Yeah, and adding to that, like, I think we're starting to move away from the Western white supremacy idea of binaries, like either or. Like, it's okay to both acknowledge the different labels, the different terms, having a language for, finding a language doesn't change who you are. It was a process for me to kind of explore using the non-binary term. And at first it was like gender fluid. And I found that through Ruby Rose, who was this actor, brilliant actor from Orange is the New Black. And that was the first time I ever heard that term. And I was like, oh, you know what? Like, that feels like something I resonate with. And then over time, it's just learning language that made me feel more connected to myself. I think oftentimes these labels can be perceived as walls that okay, it's us versus them, but I feel like we can honor the things that connect us with other people who share the same experience and use that as a unifying tool rather than something to create more division.
Yeah, I think that along those lines, finding labels and being in that space is a personal journey first, I feel. I think that what is pressurizing about it is, okay, let's say as an artist, I feel pressure that, okay, in 3 words, how do I communicate who I am and what I do to the white man presenter who's gonna hire me, right? That's its own thing, but I think what took me a really long time to do was really understand the nuances of my identity and what those many different labels are for myself first, and really knowing it, and especially I think in the last year, really diving into my ancestry and knowing where my ancestors actually came from and where they went through and how their labels changed as well and what that means in relation to where I am now. But a lot of that is very personal. I think then that's almost the hardest thing to do first, once, it's finding that inner security, right, that, we're all striving for. But when you, I think, have a sense of what that is, then kind of you find community, and then you kind of find people who share some of the labels that you have, or some of the things that you identify as. And then the part comes to, okay, now how do I tell this to someone else who has no idea what my schema, what reality is, right?
That makes me think about, I work with the brand Omsong, they're one of my clients, and so at Omsong we talk a lot about how do you define the modern Asian American experience. And what we talk about a lot is that there is almost a lack of history and story. From my personal family, my dad escaped Vietnam War to Australia, so there is definitely a gap in my own personal understanding of where my family came from. There's a lack of storytelling, there's a lack of there's a lot of secret keeping, and I think when us as Asian people, and especially as a first generation Asian people, cannot connect to where we came from and do not understand what our heritage is, and also that's not encouraged in the conversations we have at home when we're growing up, then becomes impossible to actually, again, really have strength in numbers, because we don't even understand where we ourselves came from. And at OMSA we talk a lot about that term global liberalism, and how it feels like all the conversations that we're having are maybe a little bit behind in terms of where we would like it to be. And I think it's partly because we have this missing gap of knowledge in our histories that we need to come to terms with first before we can move forward together.
I think one of the things that kind of feels like a shared experience for people of color or people who are diverse or who are not, the cis white male, is that there's this feeling of being other, of not necessarily belonging. And I think it's really beautiful how that's something that's coming up in conversations now that I don't think any of us ever really focused on or talked about. Because you don't have to be Asian to be sitting in this room and know what it's like to be looked at funny on the train because you just look the way you do or you speak the way you do. So that is part of the common experience that now is coming to light, where we can talk about it and we can have these uncomfortable conversations, but we can talk about it and still have respect for one another. And I don't feel like we ever wanted to come forward in the past because it felt scary or like we would be mocked or judged. One of the things that we also talked about is this idea of reckoning with the change. There's so much good stuff happening right now. It's a little bit scary. I feel like we're don't know if we can all agree about that, because change is scary. I would love to hear about some of the changes you have all been seeing in the media, or maybe even within like conversations with your own family and group of friends.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me, thank you. What comes to mind for me is actually like this whole modeling situation, which is just, I think about a lot because when I grew up in Australia, like in the magazine era, there were no models or people in those magazines that looked like me. And I remember just like doing this really messed up game. And I'm like a little embarrassed to admit, but I hadn't actually even spoken about this until the last 2 years. When I was like 11 to 15, I would go through magazines and the game would be to circle as many features as I liked, like in the advertisement. So I'd circle like the nose, or like someone's skin, or their boobs, or whatever. And thinking back on that, I remember writing in my journal and like kind of eliminating the idea that I could ever be a model because I'm short, because I'm Asian, because where I grew up I didn't fit the mainstream ideal of what like beauty looked like. So to be 28 now and to be signed to a modeling agency is honestly like a really jarring experience. And I processed this in therapy, and my therapist was saying that the reason you don't feel like you can accept any of this is because for the longest time you've been taught by media that you are not it. Like, you have never convinced yourself that there is actually a place for you, and for that to change almost overnight is really confusing. And I constantly come up to set and I feel like they're going to be mean to me, or I'm not going to look good, or it's going to look weird, or the creative director's going to say something. And it's still a process for me to even inhabit feeling like I can take up space and that I am accepted in this industry. So even reflecting on how much we've changed in the last 10 years is so wonderful, and also just like an incredibly confusing experience for yourself, because you question, is it me or is it the moment? Like, am I talented and do people want to talk to me, or is it just because I am like a trendy category right now? That's just something that I think about a lot in every opportunity I'm presented, which is a bit like stifling sometimes.
Yeah, I really feel that last part as well. Like, it feels like there's a diversity call right now. I mean, most of my dancing career, especially in places that were, I mean, honestly, in all places, I felt like the token diversity piece. Usually like the one token diversity piece. Whether it was like in the hip hop world, or in the Indian classical world, bringing something else to that space, or in the, you know, contemporary avant-garde world. Always being brought on, you know, by someone who was like, we're so excited to have you. But then that never leads to anything, right? There's no like foundation for where someone like could go from there. But it's exciting in that moment. Right now, that excitement feels a little higher. I'm hoping, I feel that our community is now, with things like this, gathering a little bit more to hopefully build a little more infrastructure for these to not just be moments, but to be everlasting things. I mean, it's like adding diversity on the top of something feels really wrong. I think that even in, let's say, the definition of American, it should be, like, diversity is that. American is diversity. Like, that should be the baseline normal, right? I don't think we're there yet, and I think that adds to the, like, am I just being here as a diversity piece? Or, like, what's going on exactly? Like, that's kind of the transition phase, I think, I feel like we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, we were all, I mean, if you grew up in America, we were all fed this narrative that this is the melting pot. But that if you look at the people in power and who have held those positions of power, that does not really reflect the wide spectrum of identities that are held in this country. And I think that it's a really beautiful thing that we have more representation in the media, but I think it's a first step. It can't be where we stop, because there's also this idea of like tokenism. If you bring someone, if people are just like inviting people of color or people of marginalized identities into a space and they're the only ones, they're potentially bringing someone into like a harmful environment. Like if you're just doing this as like surface so you can get like this pat on the back, or like, oh yeah, we're diverse, without actually doing the real work of looking at our, like the systems of oppression and the roots of this country, not just this country, but like in the world, then that idea of bringing more people to representation is just a band-aid. It's not going to fix these issues.
I love that you brought that up because as much as I love, the bling empires and the crazy rich Asians and like the minorities of the world, it's all wonderful, but I'd also love to see some movement in terms of like if this matters to this focus on the individual versus structural causes. Like I think when I think about environmentalism as well and climate change, like so much of it is about selling you another product because you are the issue, and it's really avoiding and giving allowing corporations and the government to avoid the responsibility, which is that we need to demand change from them. Like, how do we build systems that actually help people of color achieve wealth and sustain it and take care of themselves? Because so many policies in this country do not orient around that. So as much as representation is fantastic, and I would love to have that be the foundation of a cultural mindset change about how people are included in narratives. At the same time, I completely would agree with you that we can continue to do that forever, feel like we're doing something, but unless change actually happens at a structural level, people aren't actually going to have better lives and have more agency.
I was just going to add that sometimes representation can be damaging as well if it's creating division with other groups. I think there are people who have been building more of a platform in response to the attacks on Asian elders and people who have the loudest voices, people who know how to use marketing tactics to gain most visibility, and then kind of co-opting progressive and activist language without doing the work and acting out of pain and reacting to things that might cause harm to other communities. I'm specifically talking about personally I've been really a little bit concerned with some of the loudest voices in I'm just gonna say China Mac or Will Excel, just saying you're going to do one thing, but then your actions behind the scenes, where fundraising money are going towards whistleblower, that's just, or even just, I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting off track, but there's a really important mayoral race coming up, and I'm really frightened that if Andrew Yang wins, then people are going to think oh, this is how all Asians think, and what that does to further divide this really there's just been so much beautiful work and solidarity that has been built over the last year, and I'm just concerned that certain representation might break that up.
I really feel that concern as well, because I think that the Asian community as a whole hasn't we're, I think, developing solidarity right now, but hasn't achieved the full organization just yet. I think, let's say I look at Black Lives Matter as a movement and organization, I think that is really organized. And I think that there's a lot of unity around that. We have some work to do still to get there in a level of solidarity and organization. And so I think that now is almost a scary time when you think about, whether a really loud voice that says one thing can, take a seed that's growing and take it in different directions. I think that we're in that kind of critical moment right now.
I 100% agree. I think we are in a really critical time. And one of the things that's been really interesting about this past year is that people are really showing their true colors. I think we can all generally agree about that. I mean, we see people who, yeah, it's a very interesting time. When a lot of these attacks on our Asian elders were happening, I had lots of white influencers be like, oh my god, guys, make sure to swipe up to shop. Oh my god, look at my skinny latte. And I was just like, I will find you. I'm gonna come after you. I think I do understand the hesitancy to step forward, because when you don't feel like you've had a voice for such a long time, trying to step forward, you want to say exactly the right thing that's going to show everyone that not only are you proud of who you are, but that you are someone who will not stand for the BS, right? But it's so hard when you see, like, you're speaking out, you have stories upon story upon story about elders who are being affected, and then you see people who are supposed to be friends of yours or advocates of yours not saying anything. So how do we encourage those types of conversations without necessarily feeling like we are provoking or judging or trying to make the things that are important to us more important than anything happening in other people's lives?
I think about this a lot, especially with what has been going online lately in the last few weeks has been really just interesting to me, because I have a lot of friends. It's one of the, as I was saying earlier today, it feels like one of the only times on social media that it doesn't feel like an echo chamber for me in my universe. Like, I'm seeing a lot of different conflicting perspectives, and what I think misses the nuance is if we do not show up online as our own full messy learning selves. Like, showing the process of having questions and like asking those questions publicly, I think goes a long way in setting an example that we do not need to arrive fully formed in order to have an opinion on something. And also media literacy. Like, I feel like media literacy in school should be just such a big thing, because how are you supposed to understand the avalanche of information sent to you and form a coherent opinion if you are not taught how to actually understand that information? So yeah, the main thing for me is, like, I want to see more influencers like have these conversations while they're still forming the opinion online, rather than waiting to form the opinion and then being like, okay, it has to be airtight, it has to tick all these boxes, because otherwise we're not having the messy conversations we need to have. Like, we're not just like people giving each other fully formed answers, it's like a question, like how do we explore these questions together? And honestly, I'd rather people, even if they don't post online, as long as they're having those actual conversations with the people around them, I think that's more important. I think it's actually quite harmful to have this rhetoric of, you need to say something about this, otherwise you're not in support. People show support in so many different ways, and I think whether that's posting online or going to a rally, having a conversation, donating, it shows up in many different ways, and to reduce it to like online posts, I think simplifies a lot of the messier, juicier stuff that needs to happen.
Yeah, I think that what the online world is missing in that terms of having messy conversations is an idea of a safe space, right? Of having, I don't need, like, it's an argument already if it's a disagreeing opinion versus just sharing different ideas and then changing your mind or not changing your mind or finding something in between there. I don't know, it's like I need to convert this person, which I think is kind of the attitude right now. I don't have the answers as to how that happens, it's more of just an observation. I find it's easier to create safe spaces in personal relationships, but I just feel like it's easier to be human. Yeah, the internet, I mean, that's the tough one with how to just be messy in a proactive way. I don't know if proactive is the right word, but yeah.
It's scary to I mean, people keep receipts, like if you mess up, if you say something like once and then like 7 years later, like someone has like a screenshot of like your unevolved words, like that. I think we've created a culture of like fear to be wrong. But I just want to like echo your sentiments about like have these conversations in real life. Like there is a world outside of social media, and like we have to remember at the end of the day too, like the algorithms, the people who control or profit from these platforms may not reflect the diversity of the people who use it. And I think that we should also consider compassion for individuals who are still learning, but I think that there needs to be more accountability for people who are profiting and being silent. Like people, I mean, I was just rolling my eye at just all of the like wellness people who use like who teach yoga, completely silent when India was just going through a massive crisis. So it's like if you're profiting, it's like one thing, you don't, as an individual, you don't have to speak on every single subject. Like that will completely dominate your life. But if you're profiting from whether like cultural appropriation or cultural appreciation or something, like you should also speak up for when that culture is like suffering. And so like I think it's important for us to differentiate and to keep these businesses accountable with our dollars. Like, yeah.
I 1000% agree. I've had quite a few people, I was going to say quite a few friends, but they are not my friends. And people are like, you know, I support you, but like I don't really feel like it's my fight. And I went, okay. And these are people who are like, oh my god, I love Boa. Look at this like sangria, look at this Hello Kitty. Oh my gosh, I love yoga. Yeah, this is all stuff I love. And I'm like, do you know where those things come from? Because it all matters, right? What we buy makes such a difference, because if these companies weren't making money, they'd be out of business. But when we put our money towards those things, that's a statement, right? And so one of the things that I think is really important about having these conversations is we are going to get it wrong so often. I get it wrong, again, all the time. And it does suck because we are in this day and age of like, sometimes it feels like we cannot change our opinions. But when you have the information, you have an obligation to share that. With this past year, I mean, there's so much we all have to learn. There's so much growing to do, and I feel like now we're really in this place where we have new information being thrown at us all the time. I mean, even just think about COVID. I think this past week suddenly it's like, y'all don't have to wear masks. And like that came out of nowhere, right? And so it's very easy to feel like we have to stay the same because it's the way that it's always been. But I think in being people of color, or loving people of color, or just being in this new modern world, we have to do better. Once we know we can, we have to. And I think that's one of the things that we're all so excited about, everyone who's here, because we're not perfect, but we're trying, and that's a lot more than what a lot of people out there can say right now.
Yeah, I think that makes me super excited, the idea that there is an entire new generation of people who have access to so much information, and we really have the opportunity to redefine what every industry looks like. And I am so psyched and jazzed about this because on a small scale with my agency, like I never saw myself as a business owner, I never saw myself as someone who could employ people because I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but that's not good enough. Like no one really knows what the hell they're doing, and it's why not me? And I'm hearing so many of my friends in other industries kind of redefining what traditional models look like. Like, for example, for me, how can I lead from a place of empathy and kindness? How can I allow people to come to work as their full selves? It only feels possible because it was never an environment that was created for me. Like, why can't I be the person that creates that environment for others? And being able to recognize that sense of purpose for me, because I personally am not, I don't get super jazzed about the idea of like building an agency to make more money. Like it's just not encouraging or exciting. Building an agency to create a place for young people of color to work that accepts them, lets them do valuable work that's creative, recognizing that I am able to do that for the world in a small way. I would love to see like everyone be able to have the confidence to be like, you know how people like have the confidence of an average white man, like just do the thing, because who else is gonna do it? Like, why not you? And like the only reason you think not you is because people have told us we can't. So I'm just super excited about like Gen Z personally, because they are fire and they just are doing everything all the time, and I just really respect how much self-efficacy and like self-actualization is happening everywhere right now.
This is certainly a time for change, and I think it can feel very overwhelming because, on social, I always see these lists of like, here are 5 things you can do to help. You're going to donate here, buy this T-shirt, like have these conversations. What I would love to hear are really specific examples of things we can do today. It doesn't have to be big, I think, but some kind of like action steps we can all take today to make a difference in our communities in talking about people of color. Because while we're in this kind of Asian realm, like that's not all that we are, right? So what would you say is a good first step?
Something I've been thinking about lately, or just as the opportunities come by, is I know that a lot of people in the world don't know what my reality is, and that's okay. But I think that if I'm given 5 minutes to introduce someone, do it. I'll take that, and I'll welcome them into my world. And I think that even the few minutes can change someone or just open their eyes to what you go through. I know that not everyone has the capacity to do that all the time, especially. But I think a little goes a long way with opening this horizon of, I think, what the entire Asian community, which is so large that we're talking about, really has to offer, and how our morals and our values and our ancestry, why it's relevant in this world. And there's just so much untapped potential in that. But even just a little bit to show, someone you don't know what you're about can do a lot.
For me, it's go to therapy. I just really firmly believe that this has been a really whitewashed, gate-kept asset and tool that I wish every person of color had access to. Like, we kind of need it the most. Like, there's so much intergenerational trauma that is not explored and not moved through, and we cannot do work outwardly without doing the work inwardly. And I also think that change and action doesn't need to be on a huge scale. Like, your personal behaviors influence your immediate circle. Even like my partner and I being pescatarian, just by virtue of being pescatarian, it becomes a conversation at dinner parties, and it requires people to interact with the topic. So I think doing the work yourself, whether that's like having that conversation with your parents or your grandparents and you haven't had that before, or going and investing in therapy and like really starting to change. Honestly, it's like mental health crisis that I think a lot of Asian people are victims of, because we are not taught how to talk about feelings and emotions, and we are taught to squash them. And that's kind of why we in this, like with the Atlanta murders, for me, what came up personally was just this like universal grief from Asian women of understanding just how we've been taught not to speak up for ourselves and to diminish our entire experience, and that is just not a great place to be able to help others from. So go to therapy, or like have a really hard conversation with your family or in your communities, all that kind of stuff.
Definitely therapy, yes. Also, I think it could just be as simple as making a personal commitment to be better and to not feel held back by, oh, this needs to be perfect. It's a process. Change comes in a spectrum. There's no right way for people to do things. Context matters. So I think it's really important to just start with yourself and know who you are. Know how your experiences have shaped you, and then learn how societal systems have shaped those experiences. Learn your history, like go back, learn the histories of other people, find solidarity with that. And then, like for me, one thing that I do is like whatever room that I occupy, I always want to know like who is missing from this room. And like if you're someone who has any power or privilege, I think you especially need to ensure that the environments that you are in are safe and can hold anybody. And yeah, I think that's all.
I think that is so beautiful, and one of the things that one of the recurring themes that I found this year is I kept seeing everywhere, you know, we can disagree and still be friends. How many times did you guys see that? Like, everywhere. We can disagree and still be friends. I'm like, we can disagree about pineapple on pizza. We cannot disagree about protecting trans lives, that Black Lives Matter, or stop ADD. So, I think one of the best things you can do that I've been working on, and it's always a process, is surrounding yourself with people who believe in the same things that you do. Because if you have a ton of friends who don't see anything wrong with an all-white room, or a room where there is no one who has a different opinion, if those are your friends, you are in the wrong room. Clearly you're not, you're in the right room, yes! But I think that's one of the easiest things we can do, is surround ourselves with people who are gonna lift one another up. We don't have enough of that. We have some, and it's happening, and I feel like it happens a lot with like our generation, but there's so much more we can do. So that being said, we'd love to open it up for Q&A. If anybody has any deep questions or just wants to know like what we're watching on Netflix. Jamie and Georgia, BT does. Yes.
So I think you actually mentioned about ingredient. So there's a lot of like Asian shows going around like House of Blake and House of Art, Blake Empire, House of Hell. Do you think that representation is better than no representation for Asians?
I think it's mixed, because on one hand, I don't feel fully represented by Blake Empire, but on the other hand, there was a scene, I hope I'm not spoiling things, but there's a scene where, I forgot what his name is, but he's the adopted character.
Oh, he's so beautiful, Kevin. Oh.
There's a scene where he goes to see a hypnotist and talks about his adoption process and goes through that, and like as an adoptee, that was really powerful for me. So like it's not that I don't want things like that to exist. Representation, that's why I say like it's just the first step. But we can't let that be the only step. It has to go beyond that. Like if we have things like Blake Empire or Crazy Rich Asians, like we should also equally be telling the stories of like the migrant workers. We should be learning the history about I mean for me I've been digging into the folk music from the 70s and like from the Asian American and like I want more stories like that so we can have representation, but like let's not just focus it on the most privileged within the group. Like I want the spectrum.
I think that's such an interesting question because there's been so much, I think, backlash with certain cultural productions like TV and film that are Asian but don't represent the entire Asian experience, and you never look at like any random movie with white people in it and be like, that's supposed to represent the entire monolithic experience of white people. Like, I don't think that art should be held to that standard. It's not like we have one chance. I want us to have like so many opportunities to tell every single story. I want to watch Blake Empire, but I also want to watch, the complete opposite of that. And so how can we make space and more resources for diverse stories and not just put all the onus and pressure on like, Minari or Raya the Last Dragon or whatever, because I think that's unfair to those filmmakers to have to be forced to tell something that represents everyone. And as we said before, we're not a monolith. Like there are lots of different stories. And if we expect the same from every production, we're not giving space to like tell the nuances of all like your experience, right? Like in everybody's experience in this room. So I think I get a bit annoyed when people are like, it didn't do this properly. And it's like, why does it have to? Like, why are we policing like give it space to develop in its own time, and like let's figure out ways to actually provide people to tell stories that aren't usually given the resources to.
That being said, I'm an actor and a host, and in the past few years, I've seen more projects specifically meant for people of color than ever before. Even though it's not necessarily as fast as we want it to happen, just being on that other side, it is happening. Again, sometimes it's messy, but I think about our children and our grandchildren and how different it's going to be for them. My mom has worked at the same company, same job for 25 plus years, and it is such a beautiful thing to know that we can all be in this room talking about things that she never dreamed of. I think especially anyone who is first generation in this room or comes from a family of immigrants, your experience is so different than that of your parents and that of your grandparents, and I hope that this is just the beginning. And I know we have one more question to the lovely human in the denim jacket.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts. So you all have done really great jobs of using your respective platforms, right, to contribute to this conversation. But for some of us in the room who, maybe aren't the dancer or working in marketing or in music, and maybe are in more, let's say, we were talking about this earlier, like traditional Asian field, like healthcare or working in finance, like what's your advice for folks who may be in those spaces who are trying to figure out what their platform is to contribute to this conversation, play a part in it?
I think your voice is your voice, no matter who, what occupation you have. So I think being rooted in knowledge and learn, do the work of learning and educating yourself first. But like, if someone in the office says something that's off color, correct them gently, maybe if they deserve that grace. But like, we don't, shouldn't be bystanders in any environment that we're in. Like, you don't have to be an artist to make change. You make change if your uncle is saying something that's inappropriate or anti-Black. Like, we need to have these conversations and use our voices. I think there's power in every seed that we plant.
I think find your community. Like, the platform doesn't need to be big, but there needs to be some level of structure and creating a space around it. Like, when I think about, I don't know anything about these industries you're talking about, but even finding other like-minded people within those industries, just even to have the conversations and to be able to work better with other people. I always find that when I'm in a room with other people to collaborate, so much more happens than just trying to do it myself. And I think this focus on having a platform and having an audience, I think there's just much more strength in numbers and much more action that's able to be taken when it's real community grassroots efforts. That is sometimes the most powerful because you directly know these people. And like I was saying before, I think it doesn't take much to influence the people around you by just living your life as your fullest and most expanded self. I think that does so much to encourage everyone else around them to do it in their own way. But I can also imagine it's hard in industries where change is slower, and I don't want to take away from how difficult that is too.
I'm also in the healthcare world, and I will say that the workplace is a really powerful place where a lot of change is topically happening. But there's a lot of space, I think, in just being your authentic self and planting your seeds in where your voice reaches. There is a lot of room even in those places to actively plant seeds. But it is hard to be the one person in the room, so it is, seeing if you can find like-minded, even one or two, to just have conversations, to just be like, okay, so what's going on here? Everything, not letting the off-color comments pass by you because we're so inundated by them. But, taking a moment to sometimes just analyze what the present is and seeing, maybe I can actually plant a little seed over here, whether it's with management or whether it's, something like that.
And I think one thing that I think is really important is that it doesn't matter what industry you're in, and whether or not you have 100,000 followers or like 5, and it's just like your mom's friends. That's cool too. I think it's important to remember that yes, you're one person, but also you're one person. Like, there are so many people, if we all went into things in the mindset of like, oh, well, how many times do you think, like, okay, I'll do this thing when this happens, or like, I'll say something when this thing happens, and that thing never really happens. But being one person, you can do so many more things than you ever expected. And I think realizing that and shifting that perspective can make all the difference, because everyone who's in this room isn't just gonna go home and like, just turn on Bling Empire and then think like this conversation never happened. Like, you're here, you've heard it, and once you hear certain things that are hopefully helpful, you can't unhear them. So no matter what industry you're in, I want to thank you for your time and for being with us today. It has been, I think, a really wonderful conversation, hopefully eye-opening. So I'm going to go ahead and do any last words for this afternoon.
Rock on, you guys.
I want to say something. I don't know, it's been lovely to have this conversation. I hope that we continue to have these conversations outside of here, and also, like, I wanted to say to you as well, like, what's really inspiring for me is hearing stories like, I was a daily episode in the election cycle last year where there were, like, basically Republican moms against Trump, and they started organizing little get-togethers in these, like, swing states where they would drink wine with other moms and just, like, talk about what kind of future they wanted for their children. It started really small, and they then organized and joined with other wine-loving Republican moms against Trump in, like, the surrounding counties, and then formed a real coalition and had a huge impact on the actual results. And I love that because it's just like finding other people who care and getting together and making it fun. It doesn't need to be serious, it can be playful at the same time. And I think coming from a place of play and from trust and from community, you can build such incredible things, but you have to believe that you can seek that out and that exists for you. So I'm just really grateful that we're all, like, here in this room together, because I'd like in-person nourishing conversations to happen more often in every medium.
Is it okay to talk about things that we're doing? Ishita, Cindy, who spoke on the first panel, and I are putting an event together at the end of the month called Be the Cure, and it's a in-person outdoor event with music, dance, speakers, photography, and part of it is just recognizing the healing power of the arts and using storytelling and community to be a part of the change that we want to see.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all being here with us today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing space. Thank you